couple things in mind. One is the cooperation with Japan on ICAS SM3s, I don't know about 6s, is very tight. Japan is helping pay for the whole system, right? And development. That's something South Korea needs to keep in mind. Japanese are doing a heavy lifting on, admittedly, the intermediate longer range stuff, but that seems maybe to be working. So I guess my final question for you would be, will one of these days North Korea fire off a Musadan or intermediate or longer range missile, and we fire a SM-3 at it? What's the likelihood we can hit it? I guess there's a new one coming online that's even faster. They can track and come up behind it. I don't know. What's your view on that? I'm not the comments. I have no idea.
All right. Yes, Ingram, do you have something to contribute to this missile defense issue?
I was leaning more to the SM-3 Block 2A, which Bill just mentioned. The Japanese paid 30% for the development of the missile, and the Koreans want to get the missile, or they're planning to get the missile by 2020, because the 3 Aegis ships that we have, the vertical launch tubes are empty right now. So I was leaning more to that. My other American friends told me that the SM-6 is less stable than the SM-3. So once this is over, I'm going to have to go back and do some more research on the SM-3 or 6 missiles. The advantage that I see with these missiles is that they're more versatile, and the radar can look at the EC, which to a lot of Koreans, except this one, feel that the North Korean submarine missile is a threat, but anyway. So I was leaning to that. I just want to mention that during the Trump administration, the defense budget average increase was from 9% to 6%, so 3% went down. During the past 3 years, it's been at a 4% average. What Mr. Ahn and Moon is saying, they want to increase it by 30% to about 3% of the GDP, which for a military guy like myself, we've been asking and begging for the past 2 decades. So I just want to say that because we might have a progressive government, doesn't mean that the defense is going to be on the sideways. Also, I think that you brought up a very good question about whether this thing is going to work or not, because it's always going to be a question. So, if I were still in the military, I'd say, shoot them, destroy the bad missile while it's at the launch pad, not when it's in flight. It has consequences. That's all.
All right, well, I tell you, there's a lot to chew on here. Let me walk through these, again, with Tom Kim's questions. There was a lot there, so let me just, I think, go to what I think is the core of it. You emphasize kind of the capacity issue. There's hundreds of missiles, really. But I think actually that my friend Peter, in the course of his comments, said something of what I was going to say, which is that the purpose and really the strategic purpose of this is not to sit there and play catch. Its purpose is to protect, in the first instance, your forces. And I think I sensed a little bit of resistance to the idea that THAAD or other defenses would, in the first instance, protect U.S. forces or something else. But I would say those are the breaks. You have a limited defense. You're going to have to first protect those things so to ensure and contribute to the credibility of your retaliation. Now, there are no silver bullets, right? And THAAD is not going to protect Seoul from a lot of things. It's also not going to protect Seoul from all that artillery. I don't think you mentioned that. But it nonetheless, I think, contributes in an important way. And let me say a little bit about it in terms of the politics of that. I didn't say this explicitly earlier. My particular take on this is, I think it's time to pull off the Band-Aid. You know, they say that if you must offend quickly and get it over with. And I guess I would like to see this relocatable asset moved. If we have to do it, we can't decide whether it's going on the golf course or these other places. Put it on the U.S. base, right? Get it over there, and then we can relocate it. Get it over there in a limited capability. If we have to move the personnel over later, but get it. I think get it done quickly. The question of the overall direction of the Trump administration. I think that the Trump administration is a reflection of the American soul. And I would remind folks, this is, after all, who's elected by the American people, a reflection of some ambivalence in the American soul on these issues. And I would remind that Secretary Bob Gates, when he was leading as Secretary of Defense, said, really speaking to NATO allies in the first instance, you guys need to do more, he warned, or the American people are going to get a little bit more ambivalent about this extent of deterrence and this commitment to Europe. He was warning that back in 2012. With respect to Peter, I wasn't sure whether he was doing it my not being impressed with North Korea or someone else's. I would say the facts are facts in terms of what North Korea has tested. I was quite explicit in my remarks, actually, to emphasize, in particular, that the rocket motors, although they've not been tested in the full ICBM, that's true. They could be put together in different ways. I think that to go to Mr. Tonkev's question earlier about the kill chain, exactly. It is a piece of this larger thing. I think, for instance, South Korea's acquisition of strike assets to quickly decapitate, that makes a lot of sense. All this stuff fits together. And I would bring up somebody else in the region who both has some strike assets, also has some limited missile defense assets, and also has an enormous saturation problem, and that's Taiwan. Now, why does it make sense for Taiwan to have some patriots in the face of 1,000 Chinese? Why does that make sense? How does it contribute? Why does Taiwan bother to spend $1 for missile defense? And they'll be very upfront about it. It's to protect the brain. It's to protect the command and control. They know they can't defend every square inch of Taiwan against China's saturation problem. What they can do is to ensure, therefore, communicate to China that there will be retaliation coming. Right? So it's a little bit different case, but I think that's the strategic logic that goes into this. Second, Peter mentioned the missile defeat review. Congress threw this out to the incoming administration. It's not exactly a proposal, but it is a report requirement. And I think it's going to really fall to the Trump administration to answer the questions that Congress posed. There's some leading questions, to be sure. But that report is going to be due in January 2018. At CSIS, we're actually going to put out a collection of essays next week, specifically on the missile defeat review report. And I would invite you to take a look at that probably late next week on our website, missilefriend.csis.org. So the question here about whether these things work, this is a great question. I mentioned earlier there's no silver bullets. Having said that, THAAD is 13 for 13 in terms of its intercept test. That ain't bad. And the SM-3 family is 28 for 34. That ain't bad either. And you mentioned the 2A. I don't think South Korea is slated to get the 2A because it doesn't really exist just yet. I think they're probably thinking of the 1B. But, I think actually these missiles are tested against certain kinds of threat profiles. They don't do everything. But that kind of testing record is pretty good. And that's why I think you see a demand signal, a global demand signal for more air defenses, for missile defenses. That signal's going up. And I think you're going to see a lot more buys in the Middle East and Asia Pacific. And since you specifically, both of you talked about the SM, I think the real prospect here is use of shore. Turns out that when you park a ship on land, it's a lot easier and a lot cheaper to maintain and operate. And so the prospect of the concept of operations that we see in Romania and Poland today, putting that with different kinds of interceptors, putting those launch tubes in South Korea, probably putting a couple of them in Japan, that has a lot of potential. And you can put a lot of different effectors into those tubes. Yeah.
You mentioned China, though, and it seems kind of interesting. China doesn't seem to complain about the ship, basically. The way they instead, and I think you're right, they would complain hugely about the shortage in Korea. Does that make sense? The Chinese angle?
Possibly so. Well, I think that with respect to Korean ships, as you point out, most of those tubes are empty in terms of the things that they would worry about. South Korea doesn't have tomahawks. Maybe they should. And if the INF treaty goes away, this legislation that I mentioned that was introduced here in the Senate last week asks the Department of Defense to explore the prospects for facilitating the transfer of INF range missiles to our allies. And that can mean a lot of different folks. And if we want to tell Russia and China that it's not funny anymore, and we mean business, then you begin to look at air and missile defense for our allies in the Asia Pacific, and you begin to look at strike assets like we need. And I think that there's a lot of interesting possibilities there.
I just want to make clear again my statement that when I said SM3s and 6s, I did not mean it as a substitute for that. The THAAD battery comes in, but like I said, one THAAD battery is not going to act it. So
Absolutely.
whatever additional assets needs to come in, SM3s and 6s are probably looking good for us.
We are going to have to find some cheaper ways to do it, though. And I think that the cheaper and quantity. And that's why I think that in addition to that, once we pull off that Band-Aid, get it over with, and then no kidding, we have to look at what's the mix, what's the right mix of various defensive capabilities, and what's, by the way, the right mix of offensive capabilities that may need to be supplemented. I think that we need to get rid of these artificial constraints, ideological or diplomatic bullying constraints, and just do what we as allies feel is necessary for our defense.
So in a nutshell, you sound optimistic that we really can defend South Korea, or South Korea to defend itself from North Korean nuclear attack.
When you say defend, in the sense of having an impenetrable shield,
No, not impenetrable, but
Okay.
enough of a defense.
I think that we are so far on the absence of stuff. I mean, there ain't just a whole lot there. There's a couple of patriots, and that's it. And so I think there's a long way to go towards that optimal mix of offense and defense to really contribute to the tournament. We're pretty far south of that, right?
Tom, I have a sort of question. Okay, would you please speak up? Okay, Jane? I don't need a microphone. Okay. Tom, when I first looked at your name, I said, my God, that's a Japanese.
I've got that for
Anyway, thank you. Is that true that Korea, the Republic of Korea, they graduated from the FMS?
graduated from the FMS.
Yeah, and then it comes to the purchasing of nuclear equipment from the United States. Used to be that foreign countries through the our defense department. Now, more like they are graduating from the FMSL and more like the purchasing direct.
Oh, you mean you're talking about co-production?
Yes, co-production or.
Okay, so what I would say there is, I think that this kind of stuff gets a bad rap sometimes. But if you take a look at what's going on in Poland, what's going on for their air defense, what's going on in a lot of other places, there's lots of ways, and Japan is a model, has been modeled to not merely co-financing, but also co-development. They've been doing the stack, they've been doing the motor, and the U.S. is doing the kill vehicle on top of it. There's a lot of opportunities for work share, right? And these other things. So one thing I've suggested is, look, it's not about the name. I think that when you realize that these systems are not merely American-made, but they're potentially and actually cooperative efforts. There's a lot of cooperation with Israel on this stuff. The U.S. puts in a lot of effort there, and a lot of financing, but also a lot of tech cooperation back and forth. I think there's tremendous potential with South Korea. If South Korea really wanted to go after the artillery problem, whether it's directed energy, directed energy, I'm a little bit of a skeptic for longer range stuff, but I think that for shorter range stuff, you want to go after that with kind of an Iron Dome, cheap interceptor. There's no reason why there could be a lot of work share, a lot of shared economic value on these things. And likewise with that. I mean, look at the Japan-U.S. cooperation model. The United States has been doing this a lot longer in terms of the crown jewels technology of the kill vehicle. But there's a lot of other parts there that a country like South Korea, with a lot of industrial capability and capacity, could do. And by the way, investing in the skills and such for the rocket motors can have carryover effects and other capabilities as well.
One final question.
Yeah.
Last couple of hours, I've heard about name is Moon Jae-in. However, say that Korea election comes on, if Mr. Moon gets elected, he is saying back and forth, he's not really favorable to start installation in the South Korea. Do we have any alternative plan if he gets elected?
Yeah. So I think Michael Hanley got this question, if I'm not mistaken. And I guess my attitude there is, this is why I'm saying pull off the Band-Aid and do it tomorrow. Put it on a U.S. base tomorrow and declare, limited operations and then apologize later. The second, you can't predict the future, right? And it's up to the Republic of Korea to chart its own course, just as it is for everybody else. But I think the best we can do is to articulate what we think is the right thing.